Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sunday Matinee. I'm your host, Ben Stahl. We are on episode 40, the big 4-0. We have finally hit that midlife crisis stage of the show. So be prepared to see a lot more sports cars and $1 million purchases that we can't afford. I'm just kidding. So we got an interesting show today, and here with me is Frank Roberts. Frank, welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to be back. This time, way less time between appearances.
Yeah. So before we jump into our main topic, got some fun new stuff to talk about. I knew this one would excite you, Frank. This one we're leading off with. There's this wonderful little video game out there that if you're a gamer, you should definitely check this out, particularly if you like third-person narrative, action-driven games, called A Plague Tale. It is being adapted as a television series from Focus Home Entertainment. It will be helmed by French director Mathieu Turi. It is actually going to be filmed in France, which makes perfect sense. That is where the game takes place. Frank, are you excited about this?
Yeah, no, genuinely, definitely, absolutely. I love A Plague Tale. It's an amazing game. Because you've actually played it. You're like one of the few people I know that have actually played it also. No, I am so stoked to hear about this. I had no idea. And then when I saw it on the itinerary, it's like, oh my God, great news. I'm very excited to see what they do with it. It's a great game, beautiful story. I feel like you can do so much with it. And it's really exciting. I'm really excited to see what happens.
I'm hoping they've got a great narrative that they can go off of. So I don't think they need to worry too much about departing from that. But I do think this could present a really great opportunity to tell some stories about a lot of the side characters from the game who often disappear and go off and do their own thing. And we don't get to see a lot of that. Almost all of the story is told from one person's point of view. So it'd be really interesting to see what they can do with all these other characters because, there's so many great characters who they really could expand upon. And this is one of the first times I've really been excited to hear that a game is getting adapted to either television or film. So Sony's got their Last of Us show coming to HBO probably next year. That's also a narrative-driven game. So if that's a big hit, then I hope that they can at least set a bar for A Plague Tale because I want A Plague Tale to be really good because it is probably my favorite story in a game in a long time. So
yeah, it's truly fantastic. If anybody plays video games and you're even kind of thinking about being really, really sad, play A Plague Tale because it is so sad but beautiful. It is amazing.
It isn't. Yeah, it is very sad. Forewarning there. Moving on. So earlier this week, an Instagram post from artist Keith Christensen revealed concept art teasing what could have been for Ben Affleck's canceled Batman film. I bring this up because, of course, we did the Batman spoiler cast last week, and that was one of the topics we discussed. I talked with Travis about would we be interested in, at least knowing what Ben Affleck's Batman film would have been like. And the post revealed some images of the new bat suit and of villain Deathstroke, who made a very brief appearance at the end of Justice League, sort of teasing what this film would have been. It's kind of sad, only because as anyone who's watching knows, I really enjoyed the Batman, but I also did enjoy some of what Affleck brought to the role in what few films he did, and he's we all know he is really good behind the camera. He's pretty good with the screenplay. So his take could have been extremely interesting and a nice departure from what we've seen in DC. But overall, I'm satisfied with what we have right now with Batman. Frank, did you ever see any of his Batman films?
Ben Affleck stuff? I saw Justice League. I saw... What else was he in? Oh, Batman versus Superman, obviously. Some of the stuff I didn't love, but honestly, the way that whenever somebody takes their whack at a comic book. I just look at it as like same with the comic book. It's this artist version, it's this artist vision. I don't. It doesn't have to really speak directly to me in order for me to enjoy what people do with it. And so that was actually one of the movies I was looking forward to, honestly. And then DC was like, "No, we're gonna do nothing for the near future." And I was like, "Oh man!" I was actually looking forward
Yeah.
to see Ben Affleck tackle it because I do actually enjoy a lot of his self-directed and starring movies. I like The Town. I thought Argo was pretty good. Yeah, I was interested to see what they would do.
Yeah, The Town is definitely proof that he's capable of tackling the crime genre, which Batman, of course, falls into. So,
Yeah,
and honestly, I know you haven't seen it yet, but this isn't really a spoiler to say Matt Reeves, the Batman, feels a lot like a crime movie.
that's good. Yeah, no, I have now gotten around to it, plain and simple. That's all
Yeah,
there is to it.
and that's okay. Moving over to Marvel, according to the website Production Weekly, Marvel Studios is reportedly working on a Daredevil reboot series, presumably for Disney Plus. Well, this is good news for you, Frank, because as we chatted about last time, you haven't seen the Netflix iteration of Daredevil, and if it's rebooted from the ground up, presumably it will have that more Disney tone to it that we've gotten used to with the movies. So I think it's going to be, if that's the case, I hope it's a great way to introduce fans to the character in a way that they haven't gotten to experience yet. Because all that's out there right now is the Netflix show, which is again tonally extraordinarily different from what we're used to, and then the Ben Affleck film, which that's a Ben Affleck movie that is not good.
Yeah, which I've actually never seen because I've heard it's absolutely terrible. Yeah, as much as I did enjoy the Marvel Daredevil series for a little bit there, I did feel like it was a massive swing tonally in a completely different direction. And I wouldn't mind maybe something a little bit closer to what we see in some of the films, sort of as more a homogenous vision for Marvel. But yeah, I'm sure Disney Plus will come. I'm sure that's exactly what they're doing now with Daredevil going over to their service.
And it should be noted that when all those shows dropped on Disney Plus just a few days ago, that they were not folded into the MCU timeline on Disney Plus. They were given their own little section, so probably not canon, which is fine by me.
Yeah, I mean, whatever.
Yeah. And as I mentioned last week on the Batman spoiler cast, the Batman is proof that you can make a grounded, gritty comic book movie without crossing the line into that R-rated violence that
Oh, that's good.
Netflix Daredevil had a lot of.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of Disney Plus, one of our last bits of news here is the Hollywood Reporter broke that Christopher Lloyd has joined the cast of The Mandalorian in an undisclosed role. This is exciting just because Christopher Lloyd in science fiction is never a bad thing. And I believe, I don't know who else, I know he joined Simon Pegg for sure as an actor who has been in both Star Trek and Star Wars once this happens. So, yeah, no idea who he's going to be, but I am excited because he always brings something interesting to the table.
Yeah, no, it should be fun, whatever he does.
So, one last bit of news here that I had to tack on at the last minute is that just either a day or two ago, Amazon's acquisition of MGM Studios was finalized. This is something that's kind of flown under the radar for a while since it was announced. It was never really talked about. It's not really, they do acquire quite a large library of films, but the biggest thing they're getting out of this for sure is one, they're getting the Rocky and Creed films, which is one of the few franchises MGM has. But the biggest one for sure is they're getting the James Bond series. So expect the entire James Bond series to become a Prime Video exclusive for streaming at some point. And what worries me though about this is how are they going to handle the series going forward? It's tough to say because I really appreciate what Disney was able to do with Marvel. They were able to grow that studio out of its infancy into what it was now, but I can't quite say the same about when they first acquired Lucasfilm. They had a lot of trouble finding a way for Star Wars to work at Disney for quite a few years, really until it went to television. So I really am worried that Amazon might have that same sort of struggle working with a studio that's established its franchise over the course of 60 years this year, and now has to kind of start over now that Daniel Craig's run at the character has ended. Um, yeah, Frank, what do you think about that? Do you ever really get into the Bond films at all?
I unfortunately, as you know, I'm constantly playing cinematic catch up, and so I've seen very, very few Bond films. I've only seen Quantum of Solace and Goldeneye. Those are like the only two Bond films that I've seen. I think I've seen another one. I think I've seen like another, like On Her Majesty's Secret Service or something like that. But yeah, it's pretty much I have a very limited view of it. It'll be interesting. As far as I can tell, making Bond movies that a lot of people aren't really into is pretty par for the course for the genre overall. And so I don't think that they may suffer the same thing that Disney kind of ran into with the roadblock with the Star Wars films. But we'll see what happens. I think overall it seems to be a pretty tricky property to handle. And so we'll see how Amazon takes a swing at it.
Yeah, it's interesting just because the series has had its ups and downs over the years, and that's going to happen when you're a 60-year-old franchise with more than 20 films under your belt.
Mm.
My biggest fear, and I don't think this is what's going to happen just because the series has such a legacy, I don't want them for sure to make it an Amazon Prime TV series.
Yeah,
I think that would be a disaster. There's something about Bond that it has to be on a big screen.
Yeah, I think that's kind of just part and parcel of like the territory, honestly. I feel like it's just these serialized movies, honestly, rather than a TV series. I don't know. We'll see.
It's been a weird couple years for Bond because when Daniel Craig started his run, Columbia Pictures had become the distributor of the franchise, so you got to see their logo in front of the movies for a couple years, and then Universal was the distributor for the last film, No Time to Die, so you got to see the big Universal logo, and now we might start seeing the Amazon Pictures logo in front of it.
Yeah.
And that's the weirdest thing to me is Amazon Pictures having something that big to their name.
Yeah, honestly, because they just were a startup that had to completely build themselves from the ground up, and a lot of those first Amazon Picture movies were like kind of higher-ish budget indie movies, and so it's kind of strange to see them with this gigantic multi-million-dollar movie at the helm.
Am I frozen?
You were a little, yeah.
Okay.
There we go. Back.
Just gonna mark something here real quick.
Sure.
Just for editing purposes. So that is the news for the week. Some interesting stuff going on. And all right, so let's get on to what we've been watching. I got into a really interesting show this week on HBO that I think you would appreciate, Frank, if you haven't watched it yet. And that is Our Flag Means Death, which is HBO's take and Taika Waititi's take on the legendary gentleman pirate Stede Bonnet, played by Rhys Darby. And it is absolutely what you come to expect from Taika Waititi, just goofy, irreverent, ridiculous, and definitely feels like what kind of what you were just talking about with Amazon. Like it feels like one of those weird low budget films that or low budget series that still feels contemporary. But I'm 2 episodes in, and so far it's a lot of fun, and I'm about to meet a character that I'm really excited for. So that's been a fun one. Definitely has that very British sensibility about it. It does have it's violent, but it's definitely that British Monty Python type of violence where if it's blood, it's British comedy blood.
Sure. Yeah,
where it's like,
basically just paint.
yeah, or just like it's Evil Dead, where it's just like sprays everywhere, and it's like
Sure.
it's too funny to be horrified by.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that one's
Um,
on my list. I haven't checked that one out yet, but it looks fantastic. I've been a fan of Rhys Darby ever since Flight of the Conchords, way back when.
so yeah, that's definitely one. I think if you've got HBO, that's one to check out. And then actually, I did want to see what Daredevil felt like on Disney Plus, so I started first two episodes of season two, and was reminded within 15 minutes again just how incredibly violent that show is. In the first 15 minutes of season two, the Punisher guns down a room full of gangsters, and it is an absolute bloodbath. So here's there's a reason I think that these aren't going to be canonized. Is you can't get
Yeah,
the general Marvel base to watch that kind of stuff. It's brutal. So yeah, I'll leave it where it's at. I'm fine that I love that it exists, but I'm totally cool again with them starting from scratch and just doing the Disney thing with it. What
for
have you been
sure.
watching, Frank?
Gosh, nothing much. Unfortunately, I have not been watching much. So I'll throw it back to a few months ago. I played a fantastic game, actually. Have you ever played The Outer Wilds?
I have only played the first couple of minutes, but well, like first 2 hours, however you want to,
Sure.
because there's really no way to say how much you've played of that game because it's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah,
That much
you've
I
either
know.
played it a little or you've completely finished it without really giving out too much. But it's a fantastic space exploration game that I absolutely love and recommend to anybody that's interested in really open world, just kind of exploration games. It's a great little indie game where you go and explore the solar system. And
Yeah,
yeah, I won't say too much other than it gets amazing and great, and you should play.
it is. It's on my list. Yeah, I'd started it and because it was on Xbox Game Pass, so I was just able to
Mm.
download it for free. Then it left, and I was like, oh man, I didn't get into it enough to feel like I wanted to buy it, but it's back. So if you have a
Well,
Game
great.
Pass, then that's something you should check out for sure. All right, so last couple of weeks we've been talking about a lot of mainstream. Well, Leica Studios isn't terribly mainstream, but we've been talking about Peacemaker, Batman, a lot of stuff on TV. This week we're going super duper niche because this week we're going to be talking about the Criterion Collection. And now every film buff who's watching just got excited, and everyone else is going to be absolutely confused because you may want to know, what is the Criterion Collection? Well, I'm not going to go too much into their origins because I looked it up, and honestly, it's not that interesting. They were owned by a bunch of different companies, and it's like, I don't care. Because all it talked about was what those companies did. And it's like, I don't care what they did. I want to know what Criterion does. And this is what Criterion does. This is their mission statement. Right? Since 1984, the Criterion Collection has been dedicated to publishing important classic and contemporary films from around the world in editions that offer the highest technical quality and award-winning original supplements. No matter the medium, from Laserdisc to DVD, Blu-ray, 4K Ultra HD to streaming, Criterion has maintained its pioneering commitment to presenting each film as its maker would want it seen, in state-of-the-art restorations with special features designed to encourage repeated watching and deepen the viewer's appreciation of the art of film. I love what Criterion wants to do with film. Um, it's amazing, and I did not know some of the biggest things that they've done for film just in general, and I didn't know some of these actually were they were the pioneers of the letterbox format on home video, which is of course the black bars at the top of the bottom of the screen, so it can present the film's original aspect ratio when appropriate, which for years people complained about on our 4:3 televisions because we all thought, what the hell, um, when really they had it right all along, and they were the first studio to do that with home video releases, and that actually did become a standard once DVD became the norm, and particularly once Blu-ray came into play. And now, of course, it's just standard because if you go out and buy a new television, it's going to be a widescreen television. So there's that. They were the first studio to really add supplemental features onto their home video releases, particularly audio commentaries on Laserdiscs. And they were one of the first studios to really push for film restoration to make home video releases look the best they possibly could. So without them, we may have a lot more classics that are just lost to history or just falling apart in a warehouse somewhere. And I love that. When they first started out, they did not do much with Betamax and VHS, which were much more affordable and approachable at the time than Laserdisc, which was really what they produced. And they kept making Laserdiscs all the way up until 1999. By that time, Laserdisc really was a niche commodity. VHS really was the way to go at that point. And unfortunately, of the 954 titles they've released on Laserdisc, only 188 have since been re-released on either DVD or Blu-ray. That is a shame, because I don't know in particular how many have been lost, but I know that a lot of their earlier releases were licensed films and a lot of contemporary films. And I understand why those haven't necessarily been re-released, because, of course, big movies, the big studios just want to hold on to. And we'll get into some of that later. So VHS and Betamax, they released 3. So that just wasn't their thing. And honestly, with the way they wanted to make their films look as good and sound as good and have this kind of special features they wanted, VHS and Betamax they're not the way to go. I know you're a little bit younger than me, so you may not remember some of these, but like I remember an era where some VHSs would have like really short behind the scenes features either before or after the film, maybe like 10 minutes max. Do you remember any of that stuff?
Yeah, I do remember that. I remember that with, or sometimes you would have like a special features VHS if you got it in like a box set.
Yeah.
And so you could like put that one in instead. But yeah, no, I remember sometimes before like a film, especially if it was like a 25th anniversary re-release or something, there'd be just a tiny little snippet beforehand. I remember, I think when watching A New Hope, George Lucas said a few words before like the special edition or something like that.
What those little 10 to 15 minute snippets of behind the scenes work with VHS, but the kind of supplements the Criterion is putting onto their home video releases and that other studios would start doing later, like in the early days of DVD, you couldn't do that on a VHS. Imagine all the supplements from the Lord of the Rings extended on individual VHSs. It'd be insane.
Yeah, it'd be a 9-box set or something like that. Yeah. It would be crazy.
I remember that because I never had, obviously I was way too young when I wasn't even alive when Laserdisc originally came out, but like my family never had a Laserdisc player. So when DVD came out and we got one, like 2000, 2001, it was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. There's so much more you can do with these movies, just skipping the scenes. And then watching these like hour-long documentaries just on the same disc. It's so cool. And it's so cool the Criterion had been doing that for years. And they moved to DVD in 1998, and they still publish DVDs because not everyone did the HD upgrade, around in the early 2000s that some of us went through. And then 2008, they started publishing their first Blu-rays. They waited it out through the great HD wars of 2006 and 7 with Blu-ray versus HD DVD before they committed. And then they finally released their first 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray last year. I can't remember what all of them were, but I know one of them was Citizen Kane, which rejoined the Criterion Collection for the first time since Laserdisc. And they also stream. They first started out in a partnership with Mubi in 2008, and then they moved all of their, well, not all of their library, but a huge chunk of their library moved exclusively to Hulu Plus in 2011, which would have been the perfect time for me to catch up on those Criterion films that I'd missed. Because in 2016, they partnered with Filmstruck, and unfortunately, Filmstruck was just a disaster and just was shut down by Time Warner, I believe, not too long after. But finally, in 2018, they launched their own streaming service, the Criterion Channel. And so right now, they have a huge library available to stream, but they're still committed to releasing product on home video for those of us who do prefer having it in our collection. So they have quite an extensive history. So we're going to get down to our personal experiences. Frank, what is your personal experience with Criterion? Do you have any of their physical releases, or do you subscribe to the streaming service?
I don't have too much history with Criterion. I have one of their physical releases. I have Throne of Blood. I have their release of Throne of Blood, and I've borrowed two of their copies. I've borrowed Godzilla and I've borrowed Seven Samurai. But yeah, I don't have the streaming service. One of my friends does. And so I just go over to his house to watch movies on Criterion, because it's a fair bit in order to get it. And it's these days, try to avoid every streaming service that you can possibly do. I mean, as much as if I didn't genuinely have a friend that had it, I probably would get it, because it allows you to access so many films that you simply cannot get a hold of elsewhere. Films that are out of print otherwise, or honestly, a lot of foreign films and a lot of historical films that you read about and hear about, but that you're never good luck finding it.
Yeah. I've got quite a few, and most of them are actually DVDs. I don't have too many of the Blu-rays. My first one was Life of Brian, Monty Python's Life of Brian,
Nice.
because at the time, I think it was either the only one available, or like the stock release that Paramount had like no special features on it. It was like just a really bad print of the film. And so I was like, yeah, I'm just gonna go all in here and get the goods. And then I also have Kevin Smith's Chasing Amy.
Nice.
And there was, of course, that time in my life when I did enjoy slightly dumber action films. So I do have The Rock, which is one of those movies where you think, oh, how'd that make it to the Criterion Collection? But, they make some interesting choices. And then in 2000, it's either 2008 or 2009, The Curious Case of Benjamin Button, when it released to home video, released directly into Criterion and did not have a regular release, which is unusual. Usually the studio just releases a movie, and then sometime down the road, Criterion will pick it up and re-release it, forcing the unfortunate double dip. But that hasn't happened in any case with any of my films so far. Blu-rays, my first one was The 39 Steps, very early Alfred Hitchcock film. And then I, of course, had to get Godzilla on Blu-ray. It's definitely the best way to watch Godzilla is that Criterion DVD. I don't have the streaming service simply because, like you said, we live in an era where there are too many streaming services, and Criterion's is one of the most expensive. In fact, I would argue it is the most expensive that I can think of, because
certainly the most expensive I can think of. Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if there's something else out there, but it is a bit.
I think the only reason I think it may be the most expensive because I can only remember what the yearly subscription cost is, and with every other one I do monthly, which I know probably adds up to more, but Criterion's a year is $100.
Yeah.
Which actually, when I think about the math, that's less than 10
bad,
a month.
actually.
That's not that bad, and you're getting access
Netflix.
to all those films. But I also have to keep up with what is contemporary, and Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, Prime. Like,
Hmm.
unfortunately, like, it's tough. You got to pick and choose.
You
Maybe
do,
one day,
definitely.
maybe one day I can ditch Netflix, since, as we continue to talk about, its prices only seem to be going up.
Yeah, and not to get into a whole Netflix talk, but there's less and less I find myself dying to watch on that streaming service personally.
Um, yeah, we can go a little off topic for a second, though. I will say, for me, with Netflix, what they really have left is the Oscar stuff at the end of the year is probably the
Fair
best
enough.
stuff. Like Power of the Dog and Tick Tick Boom were awesome, awesome films.
Hmm.
Which unfortunately will probably be stuck on Netflix for all of eternity.
Fair enough.
But you're you're right. As far as general television content, they have not been able to rope me in a long time. And I'll watch Stranger Things, but I'm not as excited about it as I was back in the day when it was brand new.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's tough. It's tough with Netflix because they tend to be at that stage in their existence where they greenlight a show and then cancel it after
Yes.
a season. So it's like, oh man, do I commit to how much more can I commit to? um, anyway, yeah, Criterion's it's expensive, and if I ever have a little bit more disposable income, yeah, maybe I'll commit to it at some point, because now that I think about it, $100 a year isn't that bad.
Yeah.
Um, so we kind of got into this already, but what trends come to mind when you think of the Criterion Collection? And keeping those trends in mind, have they ever surprised you?
Yeah, they actually have. I was looking through the Criterion Collection's library because I would say that what you'd probably guess that the Criterion Collection has is a bunch of old, snooty art films in foreign languages that aren't very interesting. And I mean, while that may be true, I have not seen the vast majority of the films on their collection. I would say that pretty much every single film on their collection that I've seen, I do enjoy, even though some of them are absolutely old, snooty art films. They still absolutely have value. But you find films like Armageddon in the Criterion Collection. That's a Criterion movie. And you find God, what else? I mean, you were talking about The Rock. The Princess Bride is on there. I mean, you find fewer and fewer modern or contemporary movies, but I feel like that's simply because, I mean, Criterion ultimately is, battling for rights for things, or not battling, but trying to secure rights for things in order to put out their own prints of things. And it's much easier for them to do on more obscure films or more dated films or things that other people in sort of that maybe a different market don't really have the ability to put out their own DVD. But if Criterion decides, oh, this is actually, worth something, we can make something happen with it. So yeah, I would say sort of just by almost the way that rights work nowadays, if you release a film, the studio also has the ability to package the film and put it out on DVD itself. And so a lot of films don't really make it to the Criterion that you would say, oh, that's still a very important and influential film, but just because it's been made in the last 50 years rather than the last 100 years means that it may or may not actually make it to the service.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. But like I said, there are also films that I think, and I'll mention some of them later. I'll mention one now, like something like that is incredibly influential. I would say that's never going to be part of the Criterion Collection because it's one of the biggest cash cows of all time. Is the original Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, that film changed the way that we, experience cinema, and it changed effects films, for the next, 10 to 15 years, and reintroduced sort of the sort of serial space opera to audiences that hadn't seen that in years. But because it's, one of the most successful stories of all time, Disney is never going to be wanting money from it. They'll always be able to make money off of it. They don't need to say, Criterion, can you please,
Yeah.
well, here's the license to Star Wars, give us all the money that we want and do your things. Like, they're never going to need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They could continue to release Star Wars on home video with no special features for all of eternity, and it will still sell very well as drive subscription numbers on Disney Plus. Um, which is a shame because Criterion could do something really wonderful with that. But thankfully, Star Wars is also a film that, when it does get released, usually is accompanied by a few hours worth of special features. So again, it's not like the world is really needing Star Wars to be there. But you're absolutely right. And public domain is definitely, obviously, a great way for Criterion to get some product out, as well as those films that studios, older films that studios may not necessarily want to re-release because they don't see any, profit from it. So yeah, but they absolutely do surprise. You're absolutely right. I actually, the first thing came to mind was The Princess Bride. But then I thought about it, and even though The Princess Bride is like one of the most popular films in the world, it does have that indie feeling about it, even though it's definitely a big studio picture. Just because what's so great about it isn't its big special effects or its epic scope and scale. It's the acting and the screenplay and the direction. It's a very simple film in terms of its scope and scale. So it can feel independent, but I think it's a good fit for Criterion, actually.
No, I do too. I just thinking about Criterion, I would honestly, my first thought, when it came out, I was like, oh, is that where a bunch of boring homework movies live that I'm supposed to see, but I'm not really going to get anything out of? And The Princess Bride, for me personally, is the opposite. It's one of the most fun movies ever.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely delightful and tonally completely different from exactly what you just described from the Criterion Collection. I really only got into it because of Life of Brian, which, again, tonally very different from a lot of what you expect, but nonetheless an important film. Changed the way that we think about comedy, was bold and daring to poke fun at organized religion, which, that wasn't something you did back then.
Yeah, absolutely. When you look into all the flack that they received for making that film, it was crazy. They had a huge religious debates just surrounding the issues that they presented in it. It's absolutely has a lot more to it than just, a very way you'd expect a silly Monty Python film about this person just off to the side of a religious figure.
Yeah. And no disrespect to the Holy Grail, which is easily the more popular film that they've made. But Life of Brian just dared to do something completely different. So yeah, I think particularly about Kurosawa, because when I got into Criterion, that was one of the biggest things they were doing at the time was Hidden Fortress, Seven Samurai. All of his films were big on there. Bergman, Seventh Seal was a big one for them. But they do surprise. And one of the ways they've surprised me is when I looked back at some of the stuff they put out on Laserdisc, they did do a lot more mainstream stuff back then, including the first 3 James Bond films, and King Kong, The Wizard of Oz, Citizen Kane, which I wouldn't say is mainstream necessarily today, but if you're into film, you've at least heard of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
They even had a Criterion Collection edition of RoboCop.
Yeah, I saw that.
So it's surprising when you look back at their history and realize that, those old art house films, those foreign films, weren't their bread and butter to begin with. They did mostly do Hollywood films, and it's surprising that I appreciate what they have done, because in the years since, we've gotten good releases from Warner Brothers of The Wizard of Oz. We're always getting a new Bond box set every couple of years when the new movies come out. Again, like Star Wars, Criterion doesn't necessarily need to do anything with those films. But during the days of Laserdisc, I think it was easier for studios to license those movies out because Laserdiscs, again, wasn't really my thing. But from what I've heard, Laserdiscs were expensive, really expensive. So I would imagine it was easier for a niche studio like Criterion to do that than for most major studios to release a lot of their big films. So yeah, they do surprise me. They also they surprise me every now and then with stuff like Benjamin Button when they're like, we're going to come out with this on Criterion right away. It's not going to get your standard home video release, which is great because again, I hate double dipping. There's a lot of Criterion discs I want to get, and I should at this point expect, like, The French Dispatch, Wes Anderson's newest film. Like it came out a couple months ago on Blu-ray, and I should just not buy it because, 2 to 3 years from now, Criterion will release their version of it.
It is truly only a matter of time. I think they've got just about every single Wes Anderson movie.
They currently have everyone except for Isle of Dogs and French Dispatch.
There you go. I'm sure they're working away at Isle of Dogs right now.
I'm sure they are. And it's infuriating because I need to learn because I have all of his films from Fantastic Mr. Fox onward, except for French Dispatch. And every time I buy one and I think, Criterion's not going to touch this one. They've done Wes Anderson enough. And then they do it. So I really don't want to double dip on those. Really don't. I just hate double dipping in general. It's really annoying. Well, since you don't have too many Criterion physical releases, this might be an easy question for you. Do you have a favorite Criterion release?
Yeah, it's pretty easy. It's Princess Bride. I mean, when I saw that they had that one, absolutely. I would say 2 more obscure films that they have on their service that I absolutely love are Haxan, which is about to celebrate its 100th birthday coming up in September. Wow. It's a fantastic movie. It's part almost like video essay and it's part fictional story, and it explores the treatment of witches. Haxan translates to the witch, and it explores the treatment of witches in medieval times and then makes a comparison saying that witches typically were women on the outside of society, and they were likely women that suffered from mental health disorders, and it compares the medieval treatment of women then to current or 1922 treatment of women with mental disorders then. And it's shockingly powerful. It's very good, very strange, and it's a trip. It's a good one. The other one that I would say is an art film, which you'd probably expect to find on a Criterion, but it's joyous and wonderful and dreamy and so much fun. And it's called Valerie and Her Week of Wonders. And it is absolutely one of my favorites. It is a fantastic film. It is so bright and colorful and whimsical. And yeah, it's just really, really great.
Yeah, your selections are always intriguing to me.
Oh, yeah.
And I really I think it's interesting that you picked Haxan, given our conversation 2 weeks ago about Paranorman.
Oh yeah,
it's like very appropriate. Check out the episode if you haven't yet. My favorite Criterion release will come as no surprise to anyone. It is the big Showa series Godzilla collection, which includes the first 15 films. It was very huge at the time to finally have all 15 of the films in their original, not just their original Japanese language. Most of them had been released by different studios in their Japanese language, but they might just be the Japanese language soundtrack, but they still have like the English title screens, which is really annoying. So it was finally good to have all 15 films in their original Japanese language with their original versions And the first, it's still an unofficial release. I've discussed this so many times in the show, but the first unofficial release of King Kong versus Godzilla in Japanese in the United States, it's included as one of the supplemental materials because there was a
Oh.
because there was a deal in 1962 and 63 that Toho Studios couldn't release the U.S. Remixed and re-edited version in Japan, and Universal would not be allowed to release the original Japanese version in the U.S. So Criterion found a nice little workaround to finally make it available to audiences here, which is great because all I had was a really bad bootleg that was dying on me. So
Yeah.
so it was really good. And of course, one of the great things about physical Criterion releases is not only do they have tons of supplemental material on the disc, they usually have little booklets featuring notes from the director, if that's possible, or just film historians. And with this Godzilla set, it's pages and pages about all the films, which is just excellent. So not only is it a great Criterion box set, it's just a great box set of films. So, and just goes to show too that you don't have to be the most technically proficient film in making the Criterion collection, because the original Godzilla is an amazing picture, of course. Several of its sequels get goofy as heck. So just remember that, everyone. If you ever think Criterion is just a bunch of stuffy art house films, they have released a film in which a giant lizard dinosaur hovers on its tail. You know, they did that. So yeah, that's my favorite. So we've kind of gotten into this already, but I want to ask, like, how do you feel about the films they generally add to the collection? Have they sparked an interest in exploring new types of films and filmmakers, or do you mostly just stick with the films that you know that get added to the collection?
It's more sort of ones that I've heard about elsewhere. I found that Criterion has a ton of films that I truly cannot find elsewhere, that people go, oh, you got to watch this one, or oh, this one's great. And, they're only available to me through Criterion. I would say that there's a lot on there that I've literally never heard of in my life. And typically, if I've never heard of a film, then I'm not very interested, but I'll sort of, kind of expand out in my current list to a new list, and after that and after that and after that. So the more I see, the more I want to see, and they certainly have a ton. Everything that they have that I have seen, I do think, even if I don't absolutely love it, is still undeniably a very good movie and worth watching. And so, yeah, no, I would say that everything that they have that I'm interested in. Nope, that doesn't make sense. Anyway, yeah. I would say that I'm absolutely encouraged to continue looking past even what I'm currently interested on their service.
I'm kind of in the same boat. So far, all the only ones I bought are movies that I had seen before. I really do want to see, because I've never seen any of the Kurosawa films.
Never any.
But never any. But
I've only seen one.
But I've heard of so many of them. They're referenced in all the books I have on Japanese cinema, and of course, they're highly influential for future filmmakers. I mean, look at Star Wars.
Yeah,
totally just Kurosawa in space. So I'm very interested in seeing those, and that may be a perfectly good reason eventually to get the streaming service, because while I'm interested in them, I don't necessarily want to purchase them before seeing them and then just say, oh nope, this wasn't for me, because I got really lucky. I think for a brief while, The Seventh Seal was on Netflix, and I watched that, and kind of like you, I admitted, I can see that this is a very well crafted film, and I can see that how this is important to film history, I don't ever need to watch it again. It's not for
That's
me.
fair. I understand that. I thought I would really dislike The Seventh Seal, and then I watched it, and it was right up my alley. I really enjoyed that one.
So, and yeah, again, it's not even that I didn't like it. It's just like I watched it and
No, I
I
understand completely. Yeah,
it's like, nope, I didn't get that feeling out of it that you got. And it's like, cool,
sure.
this movie exists and it good for it.
Hmm.
It's at least it doesn't feel like a complete waste of my time.
No, not
It
at
what
all.
it wasn't Wild Wild West.
It is at the very
Um,
least an amazingly made film,
yeah.
regardless of whether you like it or not.
Um, so what do you appreciate about Criterion and where do you think they can improve?
It's hard to say where I think they can improve, but I would say that I appreciate, I mean, generally just, what they're doing. I feel like their mission is to bring to light a bunch of films that would otherwise completely go by the wayside and people would just, never watch. I think that they make a whole world of cinema more accessible to us where we typically, see things that come out more typically in our lifetimes or in our own language or in our country. We kind of forget that there's genuinely a whole world of cinema and still, 100+ year long history to the art form, that there's a lot more to take in than just, what's coming to the box office this coming summer. And so I really appreciate that about them. I mean, where I say that they can improve, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, they constantly try to get more and more rights to films. I would say that they seem to be sort of synonymous with quality. And I would say that that's not necessarily true because, like we said, there's Star Wars, there's films like Jurassic Park or other things that have completely changed cinema, but they'll never make it to the Criterion because while being not only impressive, incredible films, they're also profitable films. And so there's no need for the studio to hand them over to this company that appeals to film nerds, essentially, to only market toward them.
Yeah, I do wish they did have a couple more like those mainstream important films. Instead, for whatever reason, they got the mainstream Michael Bay films, which is still just
They don't have
weird.
Transformers yet, so
And
maybe they're saying something.
no, because those films are actually profitable. um, for me, what I appreciate is pretty much exactly what you said. Is just they're sticking to their mission. I appreciate that they are one of the few studios out there that is supporting physical releases and streaming equally. We are entering a phase where so many of the major studios now are really trying to push their brand new streaming services on us, while stores like Best Buy and Target, the home electronics section, the entertainment section is shrinking.
Yes.
Um, you'll see the brand new Disney releases, the brand new, but what used to be an entire section of Best Buy is now just a handful of aisles, and that is unfortunate. And when it comes to Criterion in particular, this is one of my criticisms. It's not necessarily of them because, like you said, they have to market to a niche audience, and the niche audience isn't necessarily the audience that's going to Target and Best Buy. But it would be so nice if you could go walk into a brick and mortar store and find these films. But another one of the things and again, it's hard to criticize this, but as someone with limited funds, it's also hard to say, oh, I want to go buy all these Criterion films. Oh my gosh, they're 40 to 50 bucks a piece.
Yeah.
They're so expensive. And it was even worse when the one brick and mortar store that you could really go to find them was Borders, which, in some cases would like double the price of their DVDs and their Blu-rays. Their price, that was not the place to go if you wanted to go movie shopping.
Mm.
You'd find some obscure stuff there, but you'd be, paying an arm and a leg for it. But now that Borders is gone, there really is no place that you can go to find Criterion. Every now and then, Best Buy might have like some of the new Criterion releases, but they'll only have them in for so long.
Yeah.
And it's just a darn shame. And even at a place like Best Buy, the prices for Criterion can just be absurd, which is, why you usually have to go to Amazon or keep an eye out on Barnes and Noble. They will usually once or twice a year, they'll have a sale on their entire stock of Criterion, which is great. But Criterion has the same problem that pretty much the entire film industry is having with brick and mortar, in that it's just downsizing, and it's, I'm glad they're continuing to push their physical media. I wish that every studio would push both and not just they really are. Disney in particular, I feel, is just really trying to force us down the streaming path.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel like any of the other big studio streaming services have taken off quite the same way Disney has. No one talks about Peacock, and I think the only other one that's come close is Paramount, because they have Star Trek on there and a couple of original series that have taken off. They have Halo now, so that's a great way for them to try and get the gamers in. But yeah, Disney and Paramount, I think, are the two that are really trying to push audiences towards streaming exclusively, and I really hope they don't phase out physical, because I like having a collection, and I also like being able to do stuff when the internet is out.
Yeah. Or when you move, or when you go away on vacation or whatever. It's just nice to be able to have your movies with you. I don't know. There's just something in me that's always loved something physical. I don't think it'll ever go away entirely, but it is a little sad to see it sort of phased out. It is harder and harder to kind of browse the shelves and find something that you're interested in, because more than often you kind of go, oh yeah, heard of that, heard of that, heard of that. I'm still not interested.
Yeah, really, the best way to go if you want to shop Criterion is either to shop directly from them, which works, or to go, if you have the stomach for it and you are okay giving Bezos some money, going to Amazon, which is probably where you're going to find them at their cheapest, like pretty much everything in the world. And it's also going to be, Amazon's probably also going to be the only place you can go to find a lot of Criterion stuff that's either harder to find or just out of print, because a lot of their DVDs haven't made the transition to Blu-ray yet, and some of them are so old that they either on their own website are they're either out of print or they're just low in stock. I have not seen like Chasing Amy or Life of Brian Criterions in years. I don't know if they'll ever make that transition to Blu-ray. I hope they do. But yeah, I'm glad that 39 Steps did, because that is just a great early Hitchcock film. If you're a fan of Hitchcock and you haven't seen 39 Steps, watch it. 39 Steps is great. It's the prototype for so many of Hitchcock's later films. And that's a director we didn't even talk about. There's a lot of early Hitchcock in there. It's not all just foreign films. There are a lot of, because a lot of the films that he made in England are either public domain or just no one holds the license for them here in the United States. So you're going to see great stuff like 39 Steps, The Lady Vanishes. What else? Notorious is in there. Pretty much, some of the really great stuff that he made before he came to Hollywood. And a lot of that stuff that he made in Hollywood, oh man, does that deserve the golden treatment as well. Let's talk about how Criterion has inspired other publishers, because they're not the only ones out there who are getting licenses to release obscure or sort of underrepresented films. Are you familiar with some of the other publishers that sort of seek to offer that sort of same service? And do you have any favorites if you do?
I am not. This is one of the points in the conversation that I was a little bit like, is there someone that you have in mind that you're particularly focused on?
I've got one that's right up your alley for sure. I've got three. Yeah, I've got three that I can mention, and one for sure. Um, Shout Factory and their subsidiary Scream Factory. Scream
Gotcha.
Factory specifically focuses on horror films,
Hmm.
and Scream Factory did an absolutely excellent Blu-ray release of John Carpenter's The Thing.
Oh, great.
Um,
Fantastic.
they haven't done a 4K version of it yet.
Hmm.
Universal decided to do that themselves, but the version of The Thing that they did included all of the special features from the DVD release, and then more.
Great.
They managed to make it a 2 disc release, and uh, they often have like their own original art for their releases on the
Hmm.
packaging, and sometimes like with The Thing, it had two different slip cases, so you could change the art out.
Oh, that's fun.
So I love Shout and Scream Factory in particular. Scream has gotten a lot of the Hammer films released here in the United States with some really good special features, interviews with Christopher Lee, Peter Cushing, that sort of thing.
Oh, fantastic.
Um, Another studio I'm a pretty big fan of is Arrow Video.
Oh, yeah.
Um, yeah, they one of the ones I don't have too many of their releases, but they did a really good release of A Fish Called Wanda, which MGM would never make a good release of for home video. Um, and Crimson Peak, they did a really good release of Crimson Peak and An American Werewolf in London. I've got all those, and they're all just fantastic. They have like I don't think it's available anymore, but when they first released Werewolf, it had like a thick little booklet in there of just material, and was like, this is great.
Nice.
And I love when those kind of films get a solid release, because those are films that, like Crimson Peak, like was so divisive at the movie theater. Like either loved it or you just either loved it or you just didn't care.
Gotcha.
And tragically, too many people didn't care, and I think that movie's brilliant. Um, so yeah, there's Arrow, and there's also Twilight Time, which almost went completely out of business at the beginning of the pandemic, and then they got bought out by a bigger company, so they're kind of rebooting. Unfortunately, when they were going out of business, they lost a lot of the licenses for the films they were releasing, so they're kind of starting from scratch. They're not as good as Arrow and as Shout Factory, because they don't have like a ton of bonus features on their discs, but they
Mm.
still work to get some obscure films out there. A couple of them I've got. Um, oh, like they they released the original Bedazzled on Blu-ray with Peter Cook. Um,
Okay.
that's one I think people should check out, because you may wonder, where did that weird Brendan Fraser Elizabeth Hurley movie come from? Well, it was Peter Cook and Dudley Moore and Raquel Welch, and it's
Jeez.
much better. Um, they did a couple Hammer films, and stuff like the Ray Harryhausen stop motion version of Three Worlds of Gulliver.
Okay.
So, you know, that those all kind of fall into my kind of genres, but they also do a lot of. Oh wait, yeah, that I do. I got Suddenly Last Summer with oh my gosh, why am I blanking on the name of the actress? I'm a bad person. Elizabeth Taylor.
Gotcha.
There we go. So they also do a lot of stuff, and hopefully they'll be able to keep doing it now that they're back in business. But I'm really glad that there are other studios out there to pick up to do the heavy lifting when the big studios don't deem it necessary anymore. Because we're not going to lose a lot of the big films, but there's stuff that's come out in the last 20 years that we don't think it now, but who knows, in 20, 30 years from now, may be considered obscure.
Hmm. Absolutely.
That's small film that only made like $1 million at the box office and could get lost to time. I don't think it's going to get lost to time the way that stuff did you know, in the early 20th century when it literally got lost in fires, but it could just be something that studios just phase out.
Hmm. Entirely.
Which sort of leads us to the last big question here. What films do you think should be a part of the Criterion collection? And if you could set a personal standard for Criterion, what would it be, and what would your Criterion collection look like?
It's hard to say what films I think should be part of the collection so much as to say I feel like the only rubric for that are just films that I personally believe should receive a lot of attention and care and the kind of like research that Criterion goes through in order to put them out. But I mean, a lot of the ones that I would say should belong are ones that kind of get that love from other studios already. I mean, say like they've got all these big films, but they don't have a single Tarantino. They don't have any Miyazaki. They actually have like shockingly little animation on their thing, but that's
Mm-hmm.
largely because it's kind of tied up in different companies, and so other people have a hold of it. But there are certainly things that kind of in those worlds that I would absolutely love to see a little bit of a deeper dive into. Um, I don't know what my standards for a personal Criterion collection would be, other than what my typical standards are for any film that I'd say has merit. Is if it's typically if it's either enjoyable or revealing in some way. If it's fascinating or thrilling or terrifying, it's got to be a movie that either makes me take a deep dive into some emotional territory or into intellectual territory. And so it's kind of one of those two. It doesn't really, I mean, it's a personal standard, so it doesn't have to be
Yeah,
anything other than that completely subjective thing for me. But that's typically what I kind of look for in a film, is that kind of ephemeral connection that you have to it.
I appreciate your comment, particularly about intellectual connections, because if it's a film I'm thinking about for the next week,
Yeah.
then I think it's a candidate for sure. And you and I share. I can think of two movies. One's on my list, and one's actually already in the Criterion collection. But two movies, recent films that I was thinking about for a long time after I walked out of the theater were The Lighthouse. I think that should
Mm-hmm.
eventually become part of the collection. And one that frustratingly was announced to join the Criterion collection like the week after I bought it, and it had come out. It had just come out. Was Parasite.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, Parasite is a fantastic film. Yeah.
So I kind of just look at what I would want are a lot of the things that Criterion has either touched already or stuff that was super duper influential. But again, it doesn't necessarily need that type of love. I do think that it was an interesting choice. Maybe not the original three Bond films, but maybe to pick Doctor No because it was the first one and it changed the way that we look at action movies, and maybe On Her Majesty's Secret Service because it's changed Bond in a way that wouldn't affect the series again until Daniel Craig came along. But
Mm.
it's sort of that smaller Bond film that really makes you think. Um, Star Wars, I think, is important. Jaws, I think, because Jaws obviously changed. It made the blockbuster a thing.
Mm.
Um, I think that I'm a huge fan of the classic horror films, and I again, they'll keep releasing these in box sets, but I think like the original Dracula, Frankenstein, and Bride of Frankenstein in particular, those three, as much as I love all the rest of the films and probably even love the Wolfman even more, I can't deny that those are the three that really set the ball rolling for horror in cinema for the next, 20 years.
Mm.
Um, King Kong because it's the most important special effects film of its era and made the world believe so much. Um, Jumping back to sort of modern films, I think Ex Machina is a good candidate down the road. Um, that's a movie I also left the theaters like really thinking about it for days. Like
Mm-hmm.
that movie really just messes with your head.
It truly
And
does. No, that was a great one.
we don't get, you know, for better or worse, Star Wars also changed the landscape, and that we also, most of our science fiction these days is blockbusters. We don't get a lot of
Hmm.
science fiction that really delves into the uncomfortable questions anymore. And Ex Machina is one of the best to do it in the last few years.
Mm.
Mad Max Fury Road, I think, it, you know, on the surface when you watch the trailers, seems like a shallow action film, and then you watch it and you realize this film covers so much about what is wrong with the world and packages it in this beautiful blockbuster shell. Um,
Mm.
I think it's going to be one of the most important action films that we'll ever see, you know, for the next 10 or so years. And then again, you mentioned there's not a lot of animation in there. It's never going to happen because it's Disney, but Toy Story changed the landscape of animation for our generation. It's
Absolutely.
one of the most important films we'll ever have seen.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's so much. I could go on and on. There's so much that I would love to add to it, but I'd love to know. I'd love to just be a fly on the wall at a meeting of like discussing what license should we seek out, or what obscure film can we add. One of the reasons that I picked this topic is because recently, one of the films they did announce, and I just, you could hear in my head, I was just like, finally, is Double Indemnity is coming out
Mm.
from
Yeah.
Criterion in June. And um, for a brief period after I saw that, for about a week after I saw that, all I could think of was, this is the greatest movie I've ever seen in my life. And it's still definitely in there. And it's like, and to think of, it's like, wow, they're just now getting to this one.
Yeah, I saw
And
that. I was kind of shocked to see that that was on a coming soon and not. Yeah, we did that one first.
yep. And I think, again, I think it's just because it's a universal picture. So it's a
Hmm.
studio that's, you know, we're at a point where maybe we're going to see more older films from big studios get the Criterion treatment, because the older they get, tragically, the smaller the audiences they're going to be for them,
Yeah.
which is a shame. I'm really glad to see that All About Eve was one of their more recent releases, because that's an amazing film that I was very fortunate to see at a Fathom event. Um, and speaking of which, going on a tangent here, if any of these sort of classic films like interest you at all, and there's a TCM Fathom event screening of it, go see it.
Yeah.
It's
Honestly.
incredible. Um, you know, I'd seen it, you know, several times before I saw it in the movie theater, but seeing Psycho on a big screen just changed everything for me.
Hmm.
Um, I've seen, I think, I think 4 Hitchcock films on the big screen at this point, and that's one. If you ever, if you love Hitchcock, always keep your eye out for those. Like, very fortunate to have seen that. Seen Butch Cassidy on the big screen. Like, they're just so fabulous to see it the way that the director is intended.
Hmm.
So yeah. Okay. Time to start winding down here. So Frank, what are your final thoughts here on Criterion?
I'm not entirely sure. I don't know. I feel like we summed up. We talked a lot about the merits of Criterion and what we find there. Honestly, if anything, it's just given me a lot more time to kind of reflect on it, and I think I'm gonna personally look a little bit closer at some of the films that are on my list that Criterion offers right now.
Yeah, same. I went through their list um just yesterday and realized, oh yeah, that's on there.
Yeah,
And that
there's a
is a film I'm
shocking
interested
amount
in.
that I want to see on there.
Yeah. There's still a ton. I mean, their current what they call like spine, I think they call it like the spine project, because they
Hmm.
number all of their spines on their physical releases. They're well over 1,000.
Yeah.
So obviously can't take in everything, but there's still a lot of stuff in there that I'm very curious about. and that thousand unfortunately doesn't include a lot of the laser discs that again are out of print.
Mhm.
And that thousand unfortunately also includes a lot of the DVDs that are out of print. So you're not going to be able to find all of those thousands even if you just shop on their own site. So I hope that they bring back a lot of the ones that they've touched on in the past, because again, like, no one's really done a good release of Life of Brian since they did it. I don't think Miramax has released Chasing Amy at all. Like, there's
Yeah.
of a lot of more contemporary stuff that they had released before that just, you know, had to let go. And it's
Mhm.
unfortunate. Um, but yeah, I appreciate their mission statement so much. I appreciate what they're trying to do, because even if these films aren't going to be lost, to history, they are films that would be lost to audiences in the Western Hemisphere, particularly in this country, um, who just don't think out of the box and don't think to get out of that comfort zone to see movies in other languages. And I've said it in the past, subtitles are your friends, but it is genuinely okay if you have to watch a dub. Um,
Mhm. Anything to
you
get
know,
you to just experience it. Yeah.
yep. If I prefer original language with subtitles. I think there's a beauty to hearing the actors' original vocal performances, um, and they do so much better now than the dubs that were done for old Godzilla movies. So dubs are much better now. I'll leave it at that. So yeah, I love what Criterion does, and I hope they're able to continue to do it well into the future. All right, it is time for trivia, and well, Frank, you're about to get a point here because you
Am I?
already, yeah, you clearly did your homework,
Oh.
and there's no way I can come up with a good trivia question here last minute. But here's what I had down. So prepare
Gotcha.
prepare
Gotcha.
to prepare to move ahead here.
Nice.
So
I'm excited.
Criterion may be known for their art house approach to publishing, but as we have discussed, they occasionally publish more mainstream films. Which of the following 90s era disaster films did Criterion release? Is it A, and I'm going to go through the whole list just for fun. Is it
Sure.
A, Armageddon, B,
Uh-huh.
Dante's Peak, C, Deep Impact, or D, Independence Day?
I'll have to go with Armageddon.
Yep, you pretty much got that points the second you mentioned it earlier in the episode. Um, so congratulations. I believe that puts you at 3, which means
Does it?
you're
Does it?
oh nope, you're at 2.
That's what I thought.
You're at 2, but that means you're only 2 behind Travis and Jalen, and 1 behind Sarah, and you're tied with Gary.
There we go.
Now, I will say regarding that trivia, when I came up with those movies, of all of them, I honestly would have thought that if I didn't know, I would have picked Independence Day, only because that's the one that's, I feel, most exemplifies 90s era blockbusters.
Yeah, I'd probably be with you there. It's kind of crazy. I mean, I feel like Armageddon sort of ushered in a lot of these doomsday movies that we see still to this day. But yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, again, it sort of feels half random just with what studios happen to just want to cling on to which films and which films Criterion can then get their hands on. I mean, they say there's tons of films
Yeah,
that they want to do, but they just can't.
yeah, yeah. For me, it's simply that of all the 4 of those, like, people just tend to remember Independence Day the most.
Yeah,
Definitely more than Deep Impact and Dante's Peak.
yeah, both of which I still have to see.
Um, I haven't seen Deep Impact, but I can say you probably don't need to see Dante's Peak.
I want to, but
But well,
I'll
okay,
take it into consideration.
it's it's a very okay film.
That's what I've heard.
Yeah,
I don't know. I've missed out. I still want to check it out.
yeah. There's something sometimes about the genre that literally piques your interest. Yeah, I went through that phase where it's like I saw Dante's Peak and I was like, ooh, I should watch like the Towering Inferno and like
Mhm.
all those kind of 70s disaster films. It's like, but since then it's like, oh yeah, this genre, it was a phase.
Fair enough.
All right, so that is gonna wrap it up here for our 40th episode, our discussion about the Criterion Collection. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Remember that you can find us on Facebook and on Twitter. Please like and subscribe here on YouTube. Tell your friends, especially your film nerds, to watch this episode if they don't know about the Criterion Collection or if they want to geek out along with us about the Criterion Collection. So, Frank, thank you for joining me. This was a very fun conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it.
So that's it for today, everyone. Go find an obscure film and get out of your comfort zone in terms of, particularly in terms of the era of the films that you are enjoying and the language that you are taking in. Try something new and have a good day. Take care, everyone.